Hello everyone, Reza here. Welcome to another Substance video. In this one, I'm going to show you how to export maps from Adobe Substance 3D Painter into Autodesk Maya, how to reassemble those maps, and all the do's and don'ts and considerations you need to know about. Let's get started. Let's start with Substance Painter and go through some preparations. Starting with the model that I have downloaded from Substance 3D Assets website. Here's the website. I put the link in the description so you guys can download it. So you basically go to Adobe Substance 3D Assets and search for high top sneakers model. We have a variety of formats. FBX is what we want. Once that get downloaded, and by the way, I made some minor changes, so I kind of carved out this area here. So if I go Control, Alt, and right click, I get to Sol, and you can see in this bit I've actually carved out bits and pieces and put some bubbles in there, gave these bubbles emission value, made them emissive. And with those minor changes, I went ahead and start putting my maps on each texture set. So I've got some texture sets and nothing too special, to be honest with you, and this workflow can be applied to any model. Then I went ahead and baked all of my mesh maps. So it really doesn't matter how well you bake your mesh maps, because at the end of the day, when you would like to export your maps, you can bump up the resolution, or even you can rebake your mesh maps, but you do need to do that step, of course. So if I go and press B, you can see this is my thickness, my normal, my word space normal, my ID map, which I prepared from Maya, and then I've got ambient occlusion and I have curvature. And all in all, these maps do help you to get a better result regardless of the item that you have inside Substance Painter. I press M to switch back to material. Now let's go through the process of exporting and see what we can export, how we can export them, and those tips and tricks that you need to be mindful of. Now, first things first, definitely go through each texture set and make sure you have necessary channels enabled. For example, in this texture set, I need this emissive line, emissive bar. If I turn it on and off, you know exactly what object I'm talking about. Right now, I have color enabled, metal enabled, roughness enabled, and emissive enabled. The question you need to ask yourself is, do you really need all of these maps? If I turn off roughness on this particular bar, there is no change in its visual appearance. Same with the metalness, even same with color. So to some degree, you need to really sit down and think about, all right, what maps do I need and what maps I don't need? And based on that, you turn on and off these channels. I'm going to turn on color just in case if I change my mind, or if I want to use a map for my emissive and get some support from my base color, but I really didn't need to have metal or roughness enabled. So that's one round of cleanup that you can always go through. The next round of cleanup is unnecessary layers. If you have a redundant filter layer, if you have a redundant field layer, and in my case, if you have just a default paint layer that you started with and you're not going to even use it, toggle it on and off, and if you don't see any change, press delete and just get rid of it. So these calculations and clarifications can really help you to achieve a better result. Next item that you need to take into consideration is lighting. Sometimes you want to take this model to a completely different environment and you've got a separate HDR image for it. That is fine, but sometimes you would like to get exactly the same look, the same result that you see in this very scene. In that case, you need to think about what type of HDR you're using and export that HDR to your scene to get the closest look to what you have right now. How do you do that? You go to Display Settings, and you can see in my environment map, I have soft 1 front 2 back HDR selected. All you need to do is to go to the right hand side Assets Library and go to your environment and find that map. If I hover my mouse here, you can see soft 1 front 2 backs, which is the lighting settings that I'm using here. So all you need to do is just to select this, right click on it and export that resource, put that into source images folder in Maya's project directory. With that, you can just assign that to your skylight or AI sky dome light and get the result that you see from here from the lighting side of things. Of course, for many cases, you really don't need any of these maps. You will bring your object or prop to a much bigger scene and you probably are going to have some other lighting setups. But for me, I just want to get the exact same result inside Autodesk Maya. All right, with those considerations out of the way, let's go to the next chapter and see how we can export these maps. To export the maps, I'm going to go to File and Export Textures. Control-Shift-E, as you can see, is a really nifty shortcut. And by default, you can see all of these texture sets have already been enabled. You can go into these 3 bars and check all, uncheck all, or customize your checks. I'm just going to go and check all. On the right-hand side, this shows the path, what exactly you would like to export it to, what sort of template you have in mind. I will be using Arnold in Maya, so I picked AI Standard from Arnold, but I believe the default is just a normal roughness PBR, so you can change it to your preferred renderer. File type, PNG, EXR, TIFF, they're all acceptable. What I don't recommend really is JPEG because it's just way too compressed. The size, of course, what type of size you have in mind based on your project brief and your need. So you specify that as well. And of course, padding, which by default should work for you. Next tab is Output Template. And that is a kind of important one because not only you specify what you need, but it's time for you to add a channel if you need it. For example, one channel that I think I need is ambient occlusion. I would like to export my ambient occlusion for certain texture sets. The way to do that is to go ahead and customize what you have. And if you think this is something that you will be doing from this point onward, it's not a bad idea to go ahead here and duplicate the node that you use the most. For example, I used Arnold all the time, so I can create a duplicate out of it. I can right click on it and let's say I'm going to rename it and I'm going to call this plus AO. So I know that because this default Arnold AI standard does not have AO, I can probably create one with AO and I will be able to use that from this point onward. You just save time based on these minor adjustments. But if I just go to Arnold AI standard, you can see I have base color, which I will be exporting, metalness I will be exporting, roughness, normal, height, and emissive. Of course, if you have opacity, then that's a different story. You need to take care of that before you get into this stage inside Adobe Substance 3D Painter. We already have videos on that on this channel, so hopefully you know how to do it. But let's say I'm just going to go to AI standard plus AO and I would like to add my AO in here. All you need to do is to create a channel and always think about what type of channel I have. Is ambient occlusion map a grayscale map or is it an RGB map? Well, ambient occlusion is definitely a grayscale map. Then you need to think about, all right, what type of naming convention I have for the remaining of the maps. I would like to follow the same naming convention. So Control C, Control V, and instead of emissive, I'm just going to put AO followed by any UDIMs that you may be using. I'm not using any UDIMs, but if you were to use UDIMs, then you need to make sure that that is added to your naming convention. Next is to actually assign ambient occlusion to this output map, because this map has got the right color space, has got the right naming convention, but nothing has been assigned to this map just yet. We've got our input maps here, mesh maps here, and converted maps here. Mix AO is a converted map. All I can do is just to left mouse, drag and drop it in here and go. It's going to be a grayscale channel. And you can see I've got a little indicator right next to the map showing that this map has been used in this list. You can see emissive has been used in this list. That's why I'm getting a tiny cube right next to it, so as metallic, height, roughness, so on and so forth. If you're kind of unclear about any of them, then probably best thing to do is to select the preset and just go ahead with it. And of course we have list of exports, which gives you a really good overview what you're about to export. And you can see I've got quite a few maps that I need to attach. Of course, I'm not going to connect all of them in this video. That would be somewhat boring and repetitive. I'm just going to have 2 items to texture out of all of these texture sets. One to introduce the workflow, another as a quick recap, so we can just bulletproof the workflow, and then we wrap up this project. Once everything is done, you go ahead and click on export. Again, I've already done that, so let's go to the next chapter and switch to Autodesk Maya. Here I am inside Autodesk Maya. I've already imported the model into Maya, double checked the UVs, and have already started assigning some materials. So what I would like to texture in this video is just this piece of fabric right here, and this particular kind of top toe cap that I have for this shoe. Also, for my lighting setup, because we're working with PBR maps, materials should look correct in all lighting situations, as I explained in the previous chapter. However, in order to get a closer match to Substance Painter, it's best if you could use the same environment when you're rendering with Arnold. So what I did, and for basing lighting setup, to match Substance Painter lighting, I used a AI Sky Dome light, so Arnold light and AI Sky Dome light, and I applied the same map to the color channel. So if I click on this color channel, if you remember, I have soft, 1 front, 2 backs EXR that I exported from Substance Painter and brought into Arnold. So it kind of helps you to get the exact same look as I explained. Now let's just render right off the bat and see what we're getting. So you can see the look is actually fairly similar. The highlights, the diffusion, the bumps, the normals, so on and so forth is very similar to what I had in Substance Painter. You can even try to mimic the exact same camera angle and even the focal length and see the exact same look inside your preferred 3D application. The reason I'm saying preferred 3D application, because if you use Max, if you use Blender, even if you use Modo, it should be very similar to this workflow. Let's go ahead in the next chapter and start texturing these two and see if you can get as close as possible to our result in Substance Painter. Okay, I'm going to start with the toe cap here. I'm going to enable, or open rather, Hypershade. Make sure your swap size is set to this, so that gives you hopefully more space to work with. If you have a secondary monitor, then definitely this should go into your second monitor. This is my recording area, so although I have a spare monitor, I cannot do that. You guys won't be able to see it. I'm going to press tab. I do the majority of my work through the working area inside the hypershade. So AI standard surface is what I'm going to use. So type it in, AI standard surface, selecting it, press F to frame it. I'm going to zoom in. I tend to name everything. So a little bit obsessed with naming convention, really don't want to take this not seriously, because if there's any error, you would like to know about it. You would like to know what node you should visit. So TOCAP underscore AI, knowing that it's AI standard, I am also going to change the shading group as well. Now, starting with the base color. So we need two maps for it, color map and AO map. I'm going to type in file and bring in a file texture. Again, it's going to be a TOCAP CLR, and I can actually select these two, Control C and Control V to bring them here, and just very quickly rename this. So instead of CLR for color, this one is AO for ambient occlusion. Again, make sure that you need these maps. Sometimes you don't, sometimes you do, but you can use AO map from Substance Painter to add some details. Usually it's a really good trick to help simulate subtle occlusion that is not picked up by the ray trace, and if you think you need it, then definitely use it. I'm going to go to the color map, and via the attribute editor, going to select the folder and pick the color map, base color PNG, from out color to base color. Now, that while I can do this, I prefer not to do that, because if you do that, then how are you going to connect this one here? Because if you connect one, it's going to disconnect another one, and I will show you a trick to connect both of them to this base color node in a second. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and select my ambient occlusion map. To connect these two to the base color, you need an extra node, and that extra node is called multiply divide node. Color map from base color goes to input 1. Color map for your AO goes to input 2. Simple as that. Then output goes to base map. Done. I'm just going to connect this material to the geometry that we have. So selecting the geometry, right click and assign. Of course, you can drag and drop it as well. Arnold, shader, and base color is connected. I am going to save this just to compare this with roughness as well. I'm going to minimize and bring up my hypershade. Now, let's continue with our specular roughness. So I am going to create a file. It's going to be a texture. And of course, I am going to name it roughness at the end, TOCAP roughness. The map that I will be having will be my roughness map. Bring it in. Now, here's the part that you need to be careful about. There are two things that you need to be mindful of. First, how to connect. Second, before you connect, you need to change its color space. Now in Arnold, at least that's the workflow between Arnold and Substance Painter. For maps that are represent data, you will need to set the color space from sRGB into utility raw. So that's one rule you need to establish. We need to establish. So for base color, you leave this at sRGB, but for the remaining of these maps, roughness, metallic, normal, opacity, and height, which is your bump map, and displacement map, you need to make sure that the color space is set to raw. Please remember that. Now, we're still not quite there yet with this node. Another change you need to make is for grayscale maps. For example, roughness map is a grayscale map. And if you're dealing with a grayscale map, you need to go into color balance and make sure alpha is luminance is on. Only then you can connect that to your specular roughness. The first natural reaction would be, okay, out color into specular roughness. Unfortunately, that cannot happen. You need to go from out alpha into specular roughness. So this is the second thing that you need to be careful about. Well, technically the third, because utility raw, alpha is luminance, and of course out alpha into specular roughness as opposed to out color for your base map and ambient occlusion. Now that was something new that we didn't have in the base color, so please remember that. We have one more to take care of, and that is your normal maps. For normal map, you have two options. You can use AI normal map in Arnold, which works beautifully. There's no reason why you should not use it. You can, of course, use Bump 2D node. Bump 2D node does the exact same thing. The only difference is with Bump 2D node, you really need to specify if you're dealing with bump or normal. That's the only difference. All right, let's go ahead and create another file texture. I'm going to select that, move it here. So this middleman for normal map is necessary. I'm just going to go ahead, go and call this NRML for normal. Let's find that normal map. That's our normal. Now, because it's a data map, we need to set that to utility raw. But because it's not a grayscale map, I do not need to tick alpha is luminance. I'm just going to leave it as is. However, for also this one, you can use alpha to bump map, and of course out normal to normal camera. So alpha and alpha for roughness and for my normal, and out color for my base color, out color for my ambient occlusion. All I need to do is just to select the bump map, go to use as bump. No, we want this as tangent space normals. Now, if I minimize and go to my settings, with this one saved, I'm going to click, and you can instantly see the change. Not only we have roughness map to kind of break up the specularity, but also we have normal map, which is represented correctly. If I bring my Substance Painter, you can see that the amount of normal map that we're getting is pretty similar. So with that out of the way, let's go to the next chapter. I'm going to mute my microphone, and just to do a quick recap, I'm going to redo this piece using the exact same workflow. You can watch this twice, so let the knowledge sink in basically, and see if you can replicate the same workflow for your own projects. Let's go to the next chapter. All right, it's pretty much done. One last thing. If you're using AI standard preset inside Substance Painter and using the AO mix the way that I showed you, just go to Arnold and make sure flip R and flip G are unchecked. So if they're checked, make sure they're unchecked, and that should give you the accurate result. Now you can see I've got the roughness working for me pretty well. So if I actually go in here and start rotating my dome light, you can see that it's the logo is actually react to it beautifully, which is accurate. That's exactly what I wanted from the roughness map. And as for any other maps in this particular scene, pretty much all of them are now working really well. Again, it doesn't matter what you do for all of them. This is the workflow. The only thing that you need to be mindful of is for base color, you use sRGB color space. For roughness, you use raw with alpha is luminance checked. For metallic, raw, alpha is luminance checked. For normal, you just use raw, no alpha is luminance, and you use tangent space. For opacity, raw, alpha, luminance checked. And for height, alpha, luminance is checked. Hope you found this video useful and use this workflow in your project when you're using Maya, Arnold, and Substance Painter. Thank you very much for watching, and see you guys later.